there.
Hi there.
How
Okay,
is everybody?
Good
there's
to
the
see
legend.
you.
Been a long time.
Very long time.
Yeah, I
Oh
know.
my goodness. You haven't changed one bit. You still look good, girl.
Oh, well, you look good too. Your hair's different, so is mine.
But
Hey,
at least y'all have hair.
okay.
Hey, listen, yours is easier though, I guarantee you.
You think so? I don't know.
Hey,
Wow. Sarah, we got the real legend with us this morning.
I'm telling you, hey,
Not
we feel
really.
we're special.
Oh no, not really, not really. Hey, listen, we were all in this fight together.
Yes, we
I mean,
were.
if you
What?
remember those days, they were some interesting days. Interesting
Oh
days.
my
Looking
goodness.
back, it's kind of hysterical, really,
Right.
the way people were thinking back then.
Yeah.
It's
Hey,
ridiculous, but
you go home mad and can't do nothing about it.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
When
So
I,
what can I do for you? What would you like me to do?
well, it's the 50th year of Title IX, the 40th year of doing championships, and doing a little bit of the research on it. It just took me back to a whole different time and place in history than where we are right now.
I know.
And what I would like to start with is just to have each one of you kind of do a little bit in terms of what you remember the times being like when we started that, and what it may have been statewide or even at our own institutions, what it was like, because you two were there from the very beginning and would allow people an insight that I don't think they had before. Because even when I've seen some programs that they have done commemorating Title IX, they'll have people on there say that I really don't know much about Title IX because I was born during a different era when we had these things that exist now. I didn't know what it was like when they weren't here. So I think what we probably need to do is take a few minutes and kind of share some history with people.
And now, it's about that time.
Pre-record on my count. 7, 6, 5, 4. Here we go. Roger.
With the coach, Mickey Clayton on Insights. Two eyes in the middle. INSiiGHTS, where we always talk the talk.
I'm gonna call on you to start that for us.
Okay. Well, let me do the best that I can. The interesting thing, you're saying that a lot of people didn't understand Title IX back then. Well, at that time, what's interesting is right now I run an agency for people with disabilities, developmental disabilities. And back in the 70s, that's what I was doing then. I was helping to take people out of institutions and helping them get into the community. So I was dealing with Title VII all the time, writing grants for local government and so on and so forth. So, but when my mother saw that the athletic director job was open at FSU, she called me and she said, you need to apply for that job, because I was an athlete that never had an opportunity to do anything, really. So I did. But she told me, I said, I don't know anything about the NCAA. And she basically said, well, go to the library and read, find out. So I did. But the reason I'm bringing you to this point is because I can understand why some people maybe don't, because when I was interviewed for the job, they told me, what would you do about Title IX? And I said, well, I'd write a grant and we'd get money. Well, nobody knew at that time there was no money with Title IX. It was an unfunded mandate, So anyway, but what happened was, Sarah, along with others, helped us go to the legislature and show them, there was a disparity. And back then, you got to remember, in the 70s is when the ERA was a big thing trying to pass in Florida. And Dempsey Barron and Herb Morgan was a House a powerhouse that dealt with all the appropriations, and the other side was the Senate. So I went to both of them and to show them the disparity. And when I walked in the door, they both said, look, if you're here to talk about the ERA, you can just turn around and walk out. And so I said to them, well, I'm not here to talk about that, because I know that you believe that there is equal opportunity for everybody. And I know that you believe that. I want you to understand an area where there's not. And so I just laid out the facts about what our schools were going through and what the girls were doing and blah, blah, blah. And they both agreed, we better do something about this because there is an inequity. So that began the work that people like Sarah, and I don't even remember who else was on the committee with us, but there were quite a few. And we had to get the budgets from the men's programs sort of on the sneaky side, you know, because they didn't want us. Remember, Sarah? They didn't want to give us those budgets. And so we had a person that was able to get that for us and smuggled it to us. And then we put together the amount that we would need statewide. And basically what I did with one of my staff people was we looked at Title IX and looked at what were they requiring. They were saying that women should have equal access with equal opportunity and equal pay and all these things. Well, so we put together literally taking the budget, every single line item, for example, player supplies. And we said all the men's programs and player supplies and got the average for all of them. And then we added that in for football's portion. Instead, the player supplies for football would have been outrageous compared to any other sport, even any men's sport. Okay. So we treated them like the average of all the other men's sports. And then basically, without getting into the long detail of it, we did that for every single line item and came up with what should the women be getting in all these different categories. Okay. And then we looked at what was the NCAA's requirement for each sport for the amount of people that could be on scholarships. Okay. We did the same kind of thing. Then we took the median of people's salaries in each area. So the bottom line is we came up with an assessment tool that we could use at each university to get what do we need at each university. And the interesting thing is Sarah was able to get her university and I was able to get mine, and a couple of others really cooperated.
Right.
But some of the other schools didn't because they didn't want to show the disparity.
Because they didn't have women in those roles then.
Well, yes, and they also thought we would fail, and then that would look like it would prove that they were out of compliance with Title IX. Okay, right. But we were successful, and so every single school got an appropriation, and those schools that held out, were hiding stuff, got a lot less than what they should have because they were holding out. Okay, so but the bottom line is it changed everything. And that was a start because the legislature gave us the money. But prior to that, I was just telling you about how we got to that point. But prior to that, the student government also gave us money and so on for us to be able to get started before all of that stuff happened with Title IX because it wasn't right. But the defining moment for me, and then I'm going to let Sarah talk. The defining moment for me, I was on the job probably, 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. And the volleyball team was getting ready to go to somewhere up in North Carolina to compete in the regionals. Well, so I went out to just say goodbye to them, and they were getting in a van, and this was before seatbelts were required, okay? And so they were getting in the van, and we had to put pillows down in the runway for one of the girls to sit in there. So they were cramped in there, and they had to drive all the way to North Carolina, compete, and then turn around and come back. I don't even think they were allowed to spend one night, okay? And so after that, I said to myself, this will never happen again on my watch, never, okay? So I set up all these meetings with civic clubs, men's civic clubs, okay? And I would go talk to them and say, listen, I know how much you guys love sports, and some of you probably think if women's play sports that it's going to take away from you men, and it's not. But let me tell you what's going on. And so I told them about this situation and where the men were flying a day early, spending the night, eating whatever they want, spend a night again and come back. And so I would say, why would you treat your daughters like this? Why do you treat your daughters so much worse than your sons? Do they not have any value to you? And so we did that for years. Sorry, Sarah, you did some of that too. You
Yes.
spoke to the groups too, didn't you? So it was an effort on a lot of our part to just raise awareness, because none of us wanted to ruin men's sports. We didn't want to take away from men's sports. That was not the objective here. The objective was to give women opportunities. And so we started a booster group. All kinds of things happened from there. But the bottom line, I think, to assess from my standpoint, it was truly and really an uphill battle, simply because men really, truly thought it was going to be the demise of football and of all the other sports. And so they fought it tooth and nail. And then finally, when they had to do it, the NCAA decided to take us over. And they did. They took over AIW because they felt that they could manage it that way, and they could manage us
And make some money.
So Sarah, you now talk about you, because Sarah came in. I don't even know if they paid. My first year I came in there, I was the only full-time person. And I finally got a secretary that was full-time. Every one of the coaches were part-time. My budget was $116,000, and the men had $5 million.
Wow.
That was at the beginning. Now, right now, the women probably have over 5 million and the men have 50 million or whatever it is, but it's all relative, you know, and some of the same arguments are still going on. And they're still not as severe as when we were there, because we are truly pioneers. I mean, that's all there is to it. And I never thought in my life I'd ever be a pioneer, but a live pioneer, but I am. And so is Sarah. So Sarah, you tell your side.
Well, before I get to Sarah, I want you to answer something. You started something where I was going to go to anyway, and I'm gonna let you go on and finish that thought. But some of it you said, some of those same issues that are prevalent today. Would you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I would say equal pay for the coaches. I don't, and you know, the interesting thing is the women are now, you know, attracting a lot more spectators too. And back then, the one change that has taken place that has revolutionized women's sports really is the media. We used to beg them to please do an article when we won a national championship, for God's sakes. They wouldn't even hardly do anything. I mean, we had telephone trees, everything to try to get the media to cover us. And they do now. They cover women's sports a lot. Probably not as much as men, but the truth of the matter is there's still disparity in the amount of money you pay for the coaches. Now, I could probably argue both sides, okay, of that, because the men bring in most of the money and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. Well, the women are starting to bring in the money too. And so, and you know what? They get up and they work just as hard as a men's coach does. They get up and they do the 2-a-days, or they do whatever it is, and all those things, they do the same things. So it's not about necessarily the outcome and the performance. It has to do with the work, the quality of the work. Are you successful? Are you not successful? Those kind of things. So I'd say salary is one thing. I don't know about the other areas because I haven't been involved enough. I only know this because we just lost our soccer coach because we would not negotiate the salary, as I understand. I wasn't involved in it. This is what I've heard. And so we lost our FSU lost their soccer coach, which won how many national championships? A lot more than any other men's sport, you know. So, but we lost him. So that's why that sticks out in my mind.
Thank you. Sarah?
If I had to start someplace, it would be before Title IX and what was going on, Mickey, when you and I were students. And of course, for me, it was even before that. But coming up to Florida A&M University as a freshman student, and the frustration that you had in high school continued when you got into the college level. Bottom line was there were no sports for girls. There were no teams. So any teams in any sports that we realized had to come from our PE teachers, had to come from the community, just for us to get a chance to play. And a lot of us played with our brothers, played with the guys, because there was nothing for us. And we felt we were just as good at athletes as the athletes later on that we recruited and put on scholarship. We just had nowhere to go. We had no offers because it wasn't available. So fast forward to, say, a freshman year in college, mine was 1970, coming into the university thinking, oh, I'm going to get a chance to play some sports. Well, no. And so even there, you had to try to get with other girls and form some teams as an intramural team, or those girls that were majoring in whatever, meeting and saying, oh, we're gonna put together a team so that we can play against the church on the other side of town, or the high school on the other side of town, as a college student. So all of that was going on with girls that I came into school with. And those girls, when I was a freshman, they were outstanding athletes. And then you hear about the Althea Gibson, you hear about the Carrie Meeks, people that were long before you. And you come in, you're thinking, oh, I'm the bomb. No, you weren't. Back in 1930, 1940, 1950, you had all these women doing phenomenal things. And even with Barbara, and Florida State was a women's college back in the day. And those were outstanding women, but nothing available for them. So my first year as a athletic director was spearheaded because of Title IX. And 5 years after Title IX, Florida A&M University still wasn't doing anything for women. So Title IX forced a lot of schools to do something for women and bring somebody in. Well, when they brought them in, they didn't bring them in as a full-time coordinator of women's sports or whatever. They brought them in as PE teachers. That's what HBCUs did. They brought them in as a PE teacher, and they gave you 5 jobs to do for half a salary. And, Barbara talks about, you're getting paid. I mean, back then, I left for high school making $6,000, came into college making $9,000. I thought I was rich. Well, I didn't know I had to do five or 10 jobs for that. And on the side, you had to organize the women's program, because the PE teachers that was before us, remember Dr. Wells at Florida State?
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Bartley and Stewart and the Martins and the Smiths, all of our PE teachers who did things for us to give us a chance to compete somewhere.
For free. They did it for free.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were national referees away from Tallahassee, because Tallahassee didn't offer anything for women at the college level. My sophomore year, I became the coordinator of intramural sports for women under Coach Tooks. He was my intramural teacher. And he just pulled me aside because I was a pretty good tournament organizer and designer. He said, hey, you can put together the women's division. We had the dormitories, we had the off campus, we had the sororities. And so those were the divisions. Girls just flocked and signed up. Still nothing for women's sports. I think that was the first time that I got some type of notice, and as a person that could organize anything. Went away after my graduate year, 76, 77, came back. They realized they got to do something with Title IX or they're going to lose federal funds. Definition of Title IX, we know that. So the thing is that started, all of that background started what we had to do in order to get the universities to acknowledge and do something for women's sports. And just like Barbara just explained, we couldn't do it and expect the same equality. We had to do it and let them understand, no, we're not trying to break your bank. We're not trying to interfere with what you're doing on the men's side. but we can do it in a way that we can get our share based on, even taxpayer dollars. Give us a few cents out of every dollar that could be earmarked for women's sports, because they weren't doing that for the men because it wasn't legal. So there we were in a position to be able to do something set aside for the women so that we can also get the opportunities for young girls. Finally, I mean, when you go back to out there, Gibson and all of them, she used to tell me, I had 2 or 3 conversations with her. She was in New Jersey at the time. And my 2 conversations with her is FAMU will not give up anything if they have to sacrifice their football. And that pretty much was the way it was. And she knew that.
All of them in the South were. Exactly. All of them. Everywhere
it was the same. So if you look at what Barbara went through out of Florida State, you can imagine what it was like at HBCUs down the line when there were no women except for PE teachers like Dr. Bartley, Dr. Wells, and all of them trying to do something to give women an opportunity. So when Barbara came in and started doing the lobby and everything, of course, that was foreign to me. I'd never heard of that. Get the legislators involved. Oh, wow, we may get a chance to do something. And her dream and what she was doing already in getting people like Ruth Alexander and Isabella Hutchinson from the University of Florida, Isabella Hutchinson from the University of Miami, and then having to get the gentleman from the University of South Florida and Central Florida and all the rest of the universities involved and on board. We would be in those meetings. Barbara, you remember? It was like maybe 3 or 4 women and the rest of the whole room was all men. And we're trying to convince them that this is what we can do, but we won't hurt your program, And so, things moved along, but at the same time, at what sacrifice? My dad used to say, nothing is worth having unless you got to fight for it. And so we actually had to dig in and do all of the work to do that. People don't realize the behind the scene work that you had to put into everything that Barbara just outlined she had to do before she even met me. I wasn't even there when she started all of that. And so
I will say though, when you came in, you changed that school because they were doing nothing. Oh, literally nothing. That's right. And you, even when you came in, you had to fight tooth and nail. I mean, just even when we had the money.
That's right.
You had to. Yeah. But you finally did, and you became very successful. But what she's trying to say is it was an uphill battle. It was not something that people wanted to happen. They really didn't.
And you talk about money. The first year I had no budget. They brought me in, but they gave me no budget. I mean, and people used to say, well, what did you do? I said, we washed cars. We set up washing cars in front of the gym to raise money just to get some shoes for the basketball team or the track team, which is all we had, just to be able to compete that first year. It was kind of like, well, wait a minute. They brought you in as the coordinator of women's sports, but they didn't give you a budget? Nope, didn't give me a budget. And that was, B.L. Perry was the president when they approved it. But the year that I came in, he retired. So then we was with Walter Smith. He was brand new. Mickey, you and Walter were freshmen together at FAMU. Remember that, Mickey? And he was a new president, knew nothing, coming from Slippery Rock or somewhere. And he was coming into Florida, Rockberry, dumping all of this in his lap. He didn't know anything about doing anything for women's sports. So, but we had to hit the ground running and decide on what we had to do. And in between my coordinator job, I was in charge of the cheerleaders, that was going on to games for football. And you talk about those vans and people in the aisle traveling long distances. That's what the cheerleaders did. And I didn't even have a schedule for the basketball team, didn't have a schedule for my track team at the time. And I can remember this, Barbara. Mickey was on staff with what was the program you was with, Mickey?
Trio programs with Upper Bar.
And me and Mickey ran into each other just walking across campus in a meeting or something. And I remember Mickey a year behind me and on the basketball team. And I just said, hey, Mickey, would you like to coach the women's basketball team? And And he didn't hesitate. Yeah, why not? You know, that kind of thing. And that was the beginning of me trying to recruit a coach.
Yeah, how much money did you have, Mickey?
I had $300 and no recruiting budget.
That wasn't from athletics.
That I drove everywhere and stayed with alumni and friends I knew who put me up in their den or on their sofa to spend the night, and they would give me a tank of gas to get to Tallahassee.
You're a pioneer too.
But the kids that was on his team came from the dorms, came from the students that were out in the community, because there were no scholarships. It was kids. I mean, Claudette Farmer was on that first team. It was just kids who wanted to play basketball. And see, we say basketball is our football, right? Yeah. Basketball is our football. So, you know, Mickey, I mean, having Mickey to just take that off of my plate, I can say, okay, that's yours. And I'll support you. And he just ran with it. But
our first game was against Florida State. We had half a gym and lost by 51. I said, what did I get myself into?
But those were fun times, though, some fun times. And kids, people don't realize what we all had to go through to get to where we are. But to get the funds, like you said, Barbara, just to be able to put a staff together, put a team together, the things that the girls need, the women needed, but men took for granted that they had all those years.
I don't know if this happened to you, but it certainly happened to us, because when you talk about health, you know, you have your training rooms for the men that have everything in there you could possibly need or want. Yes. And our women's coaches were in there bringing their own stuff. They had to wash their own uniforms. Yes. They had to get their own stuff for their, I mean, look at Mickey.
Yeah,
same thing. Yes. So, but the men were just treated like, you know, royalty. Yes. And the women were, I mean, we had to beg for everything.
Right. We were an afterthought.
That's exactly right.
You know, and you know, if we, you know, fast forward, Barbara, into, I would watch and actually go to some of the games over at Florida State and just say, dang, I wish I had that over at, you know, because when you started over there and the program was going as it was going, I was working on my doctorate. So I would come over there an hour before my class at 6:00 and just go to the softball field, go and watch practices, trying to see if I can find something that I could do over at Florida A&M, like what's going on at Florida State. And see, I didn't know all the things you went through, but you were certainly at a point, you had gone through a lot of the things that I was just starting to go through. Right. And Title IX was 1972. I came into FAMU in 1977. And so, we were babies in the industry, didn't know what to do, where to go. And they gave you no direction. Nobody told you what to do. They just say, hey, you're doing this and you need to do this and you're in charge of this. And basically throw you out in the water and say, sink or swim, you know?
With no money.
No money at all. Right. The next year, the second year though, they gave me $5,000. I was so excited. My $5,000, I gave basketball half of it. I can remember Frances in tennis. She said, why does Mickey get $2,500 and you give me $500? I said, because you got 5 girls and Mickey got 8 girls or 10 girls, whatever it was at the time. We got to put shoes on all of them, but you only have like 2 or 3. She said, but my girls buying their own shoes. Yeah, they're going to have to buy their own shoes.
Well, yeah, our athletes had to buy a lot of their stuff on their own, a lot, for a long time. But, you know, the thing that always it still gets me to this day is that some of those athletes back then in the beginning worked so hard. I mean, they did. They may not have had the raw talent because we couldn't recruit the way we wanted to recruit, but they worked really hard. And I don't think they took things for granted at all. Mm-mm. But I think these kids do. Yeah. But, you know, let's think about it. Maybe they should. Why shouldn't they feel like they can have opportunities just like men? Yeah, they need to look from whence they came, but I don't think we should dwell on that. I think we now need to just keep pushing forward to make sure they continue to get what they need to be.
And
to
I think one of the things, and I saw this in your program, and I adopted this early on, because think about, you and I went to college, and we came to college to get a degree, to get an education. Okay. And when we brought those young ladies in, our focus and our main focus was, you're coming to get an education, number one. And so we had a great graduation percentage, even before the NCAA made a requirement to look at the percentages of graduation by sport and by programs. Even long before that, the women's sports were doing that all the time. When a woman in college, you got to get a degree. You got to come, because you're going to be leaving here and you're going out into the world.
Well, let me ask you both about something. When we first started, our governing body was AIAW.
Yes.
Right.
And it was run by women.
Yes.
Right.
And the NCAA didn't want to have anything to do with women's sports.
No,
that's exactly right.
Tell people a little bit about what happened and how the NCAA basically came in and bought women's sports. But we even had a year where we had an AIAW national championship game in basketball and an NCAA national championship
right.
in basketball.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. With same thing with track and some other things too. So
yeah.
Well, I tell you, I don't know if you know this or not, but I ran for president of AIAW the year that NCAA was taking it over, because I was against it. I didn't think, and my school was against it, because they didn't feel like we should, because what was going to happen, we had different kind of recruiting rules, everything else to try to keep the costs down, to not get this thing out of control. We allowed athletes to work if they needed to. There were a lot of things that going into the NCAA, we were going to disenfranchise athletes a lot. And so we were against it. But I lost that election. And at that time, AIW was really, in my opinion, negotiating wrong. They just caved in. There was a group of these, especially from California, that group, I can't remember what their names were, but in Texas, where they were on the NCAA side. And so when we got to the NCAA conference where they were going to vote on this, they were the ones that, it was just awful. I mean, they just took us over.
But they had their president's backing, and they had more funding than you and I did. Tennessee, Texas, and I mean, we can name names. We know with the Women's Sports Foundation, eventually those same people, built that, but they had things going for them that we did not have, and they didn't take care of the people across the country. I mean, I sat on the AIAW council, and that same year, the year that they folded, I was on the council. I can remember flying into New Jersey and having to drive to New Jersey, Jersey City at 3 a.m. in the morning, Barbara. I was a little country girl, had never flown very much. And I can remember my dad told me, he said, you got to stop and use a phone and call me in the middle of the night, because I landed like at 1 a.m. in the morning. And I had to drive out to New Jersey City for the AIAW council meeting. I got there like an hour before the meeting was going to start, like at 5 in the morning, 5 a.m. I got there like 4, and I sat in front of this girl's house in a car that I rented at 4 a.m. in the morning. But those are the kinds of things that we had to go through. And all of the women on that committee, it was like 23 of us, we were in this woman's house meeting and discussing and trying to decide on how we were going to fight the NCAA and keep them from taking over our championships. And they were coming. It was like a bulldozer coming and just pushing us aside. And some of those same women were saying, well, they've got the money and they're offering our teams this and they're offering that. And AIW couldn't offer that. So we were losing.
I can't remember the woman's name. You might be able to recall. She was from UCLA, and she was the big spearheader behind that. And I remember I called her one day, and I said to her, I said, if we end up going with the NCAA, they abuse these guys. They take advantage of these athletes and so on. And she said, well, if the men can be abused, then the women have the right to be abused too. That was her answer to me. And I went, are you kidding me? You have got to be kidding me. But anyway, that was that set of people. But they felt strongly about things. The other thing I want to tell you about, though, which was probably one of the most unbelievable experiences of my life with athletics, I was pregnant. I was like 8 months pregnant. I mean, I was big, and we had the NCAA meeting that I had to go to, and we were fighting to keep slow pitch softball.
Okay.
Because they were going to fast pitch. Do you remember that?
Remember that.
Do you remember? And all of the Southern schools were slow pitch. Okay. Yes. And I'll never forget it because I was supposed to be the spokesperson. And I got up, and here I am 8 months pregnant, and I'm talking about slow pitch softball and everything. I thought these men were going to, they just couldn't.
Almost, how dare you?
Yeah. It was like, oh my gosh, because they'd never experienced, I mean, how do I say this? They were so gentlemen. Okay. They were very gentlemanlike. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be, but it was almost overly, I don't even know how to explain what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. But I remember that battle, and we lost that battle. And that was a shame. That disenfranchised a lot of young girls. Yeah. But it's worked out. But
it was all about the funding and the fact that the NCAA had the funding to sponsor those championships, and the women that were at the other universities and the ones that were at those schools that were actually had better programs, they had scholarships. They were winning the AIAW championships on a regular basis. Right. And so they had all the power. Their presidents had the power. And it was all about how much, it was going to cost them to put on a higher level championship. And so those schools ran to that. And the AIAW couldn't compete with that, I know. And so, we ended up losing out. That was like 81, 82. And we knew anything. You remember the first year, the AIAW had championships and the NCAA had championships as well. And there were two separate championships for women. And AIAW was fighting, trying to, advertise and have the best championships, but we just couldn't compete with the NCAA.
I know.
What do y'all
we won 5 national championships, and half of them were NCAA and half were AIAW.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you young ladies see now as the results of Title IX 50 years later?
Oh, I think women have wonderful opportunities now. I don't think, I think there's still some battles ahead. I mean, of course, but I mean, my gosh, I wish I was a young person again, and I could have, because I know I'd be a scholarship athlete back. I know I would have. Right. I mean, I could outrun the guys and everything else back then. So, and so that's wonderful. I'm glad that my grandchildren, my granddaughter, they're all going to have these opportunities without it hurting the men. It has not hurt the men's programs one bit.
Right.
Some of the other sports have had to go by the wayside in some schools, and I hated to see that. That was an unfortunate thing, I think that has happened some places.
I like to see, I totally agree with everything Barbara just said. And when you think about what it was and how it has evolved and how it has grown, you can't be more happy for the fact that you have more women on scholarship, you have more women in coaching, you have more women in administrative positions, you have women in positions that we never even thought we needed,
Right.
The trainers in their full time. and they don't have to do 2 or 3 jobs in order to be able to have that one job. And, so you're happy about that. But like Barbara said, there's so much more that can be done even now. It's not equal. We know that. We would love to see it continue to grow. And obviously, probably not in our lifetime, we'll see it where we want it to be. But it's like anything else. You keep working towards the goals that you are trying to achieve. And that's going to be whatever that equality we can get to down the road. But opportunity is what's so wonderful.
Look at what the soccer women have done.
Exactly.
They've gotten equal pay.
That's right.
They fought for that. And so those are the kind of battles that are going to continue, because they won more championships than the men did.
Mm-hmm.
And, they were getting paid, what, a third or something like that.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know the exact thing, but now they're getting equal pay, and they fought hard for that. And so that's, that we're always going to have that, and I can see where some of maybe the men's, they used to call them minor sports. I don't know that they're minor, but, I can see why some of them might want to fight too, to give opportunities for some young men, just to give diversity for people to have opportunities. But anyway, I am happy with where we are, especially the media, but I know that there's a lot more work to do, and there's some very energetic people out there that can do it.
I'd like to see the diversity, of course, go across the board, not just male, female, but in the different sizes of schools, the divisions, the HBCUs, to bring a lot of those schools up to a higher level, even though, things are better. They're better than they were, but there's so much more that need to be done in order for the NCAA to be all inclusive. I feel like they can do a better job when it comes to, different universities. You got universities in every culture, at this point, and they are NCAA represented, and, they're out there. But I don't think the NCAA is doing enough to make sure that all of those schools are being treated equally or as equal as possible, because you got the big schools who don't want to give up the power and the money. And at some point, if they're going to be a NCAA powerhouse, they got to realize that a lot of times you can't have an organization unless you have levels as well. And so those people that's at the top, even though that's happened in the past and they've been able to infiltrate money down to the lower levels, it needs, they need to look at that formula and see how they can improve that, even from covering, those schools on, on social media. Even like I said, even though it's happening, we know that it's out there. We know that it's way better than it ever was. But like you said, when the top people get higher and higher, then you need to bring the ones below up too. Don't just leave them down there.
Well, young lady, please go ahead, Barbara. Please go ahead, Barbara.
I was just going to say one thing real quickly, because I really like what you just said. And one of the things that always bothered me was that there are so many talented people, and especially young men back then, and young women, because it was just starting, but a lot of young men that were already in it that could have gone to a Division II school and played.
Yeah.
But there weren't enough emphasis on that. It's always about the big sports, they get all the attention and everything else. And you have kids that stay on these Division I teams and they never get to play. So why isn't Division II just as important to that person as it is to a Division I person? And that to me is a communication, what you're really talking about, Sarah, bringing them up as in importance as any Division I. It's almost like we have semi-pros,
right.
Semi-pro football programs.
Yes.
And then the rest of them are, they fall in place. I know, Mickey, you were probably trying to say goodbye. So
I wasn't, not yet, but I wanted each of you to take a minute and kind of reflect on where we are historically, and then just kind of share with us a moment that you really feel a special kinship when you look at something that's happened and kind of warms your heart? That you had something to do with over these 50 years, that you can look at what's going on now and have a really feel good moment and a feeling that you know that you helped contribute it to get to where it is?
I'd like to speak to that. Every time I get the opportunity to see one of my former athletes or a link to a coach, a program, and I just spoke to one of Mickey's girls who's being inducted into the Hall of Fame, Pamela Riley, and she was an outstanding coach. And sometimes you may be an athlete in a program and things don't click until you finish your eligibility and you get your degree and you get out there in the work world and you find your niche. And I love seeing young ladies move from one level on to where they are today. Pam is an outstanding high school coach, but she spent almost 10 years at Florida A&M coaching volleyball and tennis. And she expressed to me,
and assistant basketball.
And assistant
basketball.
See, and that's what I'm talking about. So I was telling her, Barbara, I said, it's kind of like we may have started the program and we are the grandmothers or the great grandmothers, and we got a family tree, and the coaches are under our family tree, and then the athletes, was coached by the coach, and so now the coach got athletes who have children, so now he's a grand coach. And then I said, we got grandmothers, we got grand coach and grand athletic directors and great grands and great coaches. I said, so the family continues. But here's the thing. If we don't tell our former athletes about the story, the history, the Title IX, and Mickey, that's why I love the fact that you're doing this, because if we don't tell them the story and tell them where they came from, it's difficult for them to appreciate it and pass it on to the next level and make the young ladies realize, look what they went through to get here. So when you finish, go into coaching, go into administration, do something so that you can also hold that niche and raise that level higher and continue to grow that. I love seeing that. And it just warms my heart when I see a Claudette Farmer, a Frances Knight, a Pamela Riley, and Barbara, you probably can go on and on and on. And we got girls that have moved into the National League. And when you see that, and you know that they give recognition to their high school coach, their college coach, and that just makes me feel good. And that's where the story makes you feel so good, because it came from nothing, and now it has grown. And when they get a chance to speak, they talk about how they got there.
They've also gone on to the pros.
Yes.
But the other thing too is that one of the things that have made the men so successful over the years is that these athletes, they have this incredible network.
Yes.
Even after they graduate and all that stuff, there's a good old boy network, and it's a good thing. It's really good for work and for professional life and all that stuff. Well, that's what's happening for women now too. And not only that, the one thing that I kind of feel like I sort of don't want them to have to feel like we did all this great stuff, but at the same time, I know they need to know that. Okay. But they have to give back. I mean, the men have been giving money to these schools for a long, long time. And one of the things that I think would help elevate women, and I know a lot of them have done it, where they give back to their institution. They do endow scholarships. They do the things that for women. I know a lot of the people that, when I was women's athletic director, a lot of the people in our booster program, when they got money later, and some of the athletes even did that, endowed scholarships and stuff. And that's the way that equity really comes about, because if you think about it, money is what drives a lot of decisions about everything. Right. And so, women have to be doing the same thing that men have been doing traditionally for a long time. But, my fuzzy thing that you're asking about, is really along the same lines as what Sarah's talking about, is when I see athletes, and I'm privileged to be on the Hall of Fame committee for FSU. So I get to review all of their stuff, and it reminds me of them. And I think I've tried to get all of them that I remembered and knew back then in the Hall of Fame as many. Now I don't even know them hardly, because I don't go to all the games and all this stuff, but I'm not as involved in it as I used to be. But just seeing them, and I've had them call me from time to time, and just, it's just that warms your heart more than anything. And you see them being successful and in that. So that's about the best that I know of.
The Hall of Fame committees, I too am on FAMU's Hall of Fame committee, and we're in the process of, we just scheduled our event for September the 9th, this year, Friday night. And so seeing our girls past and future come back, like you said, participate and get a chance to see them, it warms.
And they're grown up, and they have children, and they have all this stuff, and it's really wonderful to see. It really is.
But I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I was getting a little uncomfortable looking at some of the celebrations about the 50 years, and I just thought that there was a lot that wasn't being told. And one of the things that I try to do with INSiiGHTS is we try to tell a story that everybody else doesn't tell. And this was one that it was kind of dear to my heart. It's where I started coaching.
Well, you're it. Yeah, you're finding right along with us.
He's our foundation. He's one of them. Yeah,
exactly.
And I just remember people telling me that the Rattlerette basketball team was great for father-daughter relationships. And all the dads, they were bringing their daughters to the games, and we would have them talk to the players, and the players would talk to the daughters. And all three of my daughters played. And even as I've worked at the university, one of the things that we found out was there are companies and corporations that one of the things they want to know is, who are your athletes? Who are your student athletes? And if that young lady played on a team or was a part of a team, we know that she understands the dynamics of team orientation, that we can bring her into our situation, and she knows that it's not about her, it's about everybody. We had a story that we did with mothers and their athletic offspring. And one of the young men that we interviewed said that he had just told his mother that he does something with Tyler Perry pictures or somebody, and he was saying that actually I'd gotten him a scholarship, high jump at Bethune-Cookman, but he said that he could tell people who had played sports by their demeanor and their self-confidence, and he said that he could just identify them. And that's the trait that we see a lot of times now in our female athletes. They are those people who have good self-esteem. They're not the low self-esteem young ladies. You see, they're confident. They walk in situations. They research. They work hard. And a lot of that comes from the team upbringing that they've had and being in that structured environment.
Right.
But I was just going to add to Sarah about a young lady that we had that I had to remind Sarah of who she was, because she played for me 1 year. She just got inducted. She's a senator now from
oh, wow.
Fort Lauderdale.
Oh.
And
what's her name?
Dr. Rosalind Osgood.
Is she a Florida senator?
She is.
Yes.
Oh, I'm going to look her up right now.
Yeah. I'm retired, so this is what I do. We do high school games.
How fun.
We just try to make sure that the kids get as much attention as they can, and it's free. So the kids take the copy of the link, send it to college coaches. They've got scholarships from the games that we've done. So we're just trying to give back to the community, Barbara. That's all it is.
But Barbara, something I tell him sometime, when I think about it, what he's doing today could possibly have started when he became the women's basketball coach at FAMU.
What do you mean?
That was the beginning. That was the beginning of what he wanted to do later in his life.
Oh, yeah,
that was the foundation. So in a way, women's athletics brought him to where he is now.
I wouldn't argue that.
Yes.
I wouldn't argue that. I made so many friends and connections, and And a lot of what we do now, even now, when we do games, we make sure we cover the girls' basketball games. In fact, the number one game that we did this past year was North Florida Christian and God Be High. I mean, it was bigger than any of the other boys' games that we did. That was the game that most people watched, was the girls.
See, that's what I'm saying. We're getting much more exposure in media, and so thank you. I agree with her. Thank you very much for doing this.
It's right. The same thing. And
Nikki, I want to plug. Yeah, I like to plug something else if you don't mind.
It hadn't stopped you yet.
I mean, this is indirect, but Barbara, this gives you a pat on the back because, and this is very special to me. When I think about your lobbying and what you started and what you did for the state of Florida for women's athletics to get off the ground scholarships for the universities, you take a look over at Florida A&M and you look at the only women's athletic facility in the state during that time. I don't know if there's another one, the Lewis Stewart Bartley Women's Athletic Facility. That building, and I feel proud that I fought for it, I designed it, I set it up. They asked me the question, so what would you do if you got these funds from the state? I said, the first thing I do is get a home for my coaches. We have no offices. We have nowhere to have an office. And I was stunned, but happy that they set aside that capital outlay money for that building. Still standing. Women are not in there, but that's another chapter. But the thing that I like to think of is that all of my coaches had the opportunity to be in one area together, running the program that came from that lobbying that we did.
Yes, I thank you for bringing that up because I forgot to mention that because we got, I can't even remember how much it was, but millions and millions of dollars that went to the actual operation of the programs. And then there were millions and millions that was given to build facilities, to make facilities equitable. And that still wasn't enough to make it equitable because nobody filled out everything properly. But still, it was ahead. It was definitely in the right direction. It was definitely in the right direction. So, and I don't know right now the money that we got back then, which a lot of money for then, but I don't know how it folds into their budgets now. It's probably very small compared to what.
That was a one-time allocation. I remember the amount, $267,000
for your thing
for that building. Classroom, storage, weight room, all locker rooms for the women. Because we said, we have nothing, so we need something, and it happened, and it was beautiful. I mean, we would like to see that restored, but for that moment, from 1977 to 1988, we had a home, we had a place, and it was wonderful, and it was all because of the work you started. And the work we were able to get together and actually complete. And it's still standing. I'll tell you, it was a labor of love, but it was from my heart. And yours too. It wasn't, this was a team effort. I mean, it was.
I might have put the seed there and all that, but boy, we had to all lobby. We had to all call legislators. We had to all do
many hours.
Of things.
Many hours.
It took several sessions. It didn't happen in one session. It took several sessions.
Many.
But we had some champions, and you can't get anything. I've lobbied now for over 45 years, so I can tell you when you want to get anything done, you have to have your champions, and that's what Herb Morgan was. He really was a champion for us. You remember, he was in the House, and he really, really went to bat. Dempsey Barron did too, but Herb Morgan the most. And so it's ironic that it took two men to bring equity for women's sports, politically, but it did. And then what is really interesting about this is after we got that first appropriation, that was the big one where you could build and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Well, the next year when we went in, you should have seen the different legislators who had some of the smaller schools in their districts.
Yeah.
All of a sudden said, oh, well, we really need to have this and we really need to have that. And so all of a sudden we were a center of attention for a lot of these legislators that ended up getting more money for their own individual schools.
And
so
it spread out of the state of Florida. They were like,
Yeah.
you know, what did Florida do? You know,
Yeah.
well, they did da 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 da, and a lot of the other states started copying what was done in Florida.
Yeah, well, you know, I feel real proud of the women's programs in Florida. I mean,
yeah.
they have grown and they have done real well. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, but you brought me down memory lane here. And you know, though, in the job that I have now, I remember when I first was hired as women's athletic director, I had the hardest time dealing with the amount of money that was being spent in athletics when I knew people with disabilities had nothing. I mean, literally nothing and no opportunity. So it was very hard for me to even put a booster group together to begin with. But then I got into it and I realized that people are going to give to what they believe in.
Right.
And not everybody believes in the same thing. So I felt okay about what I'm doing. But now I've come full circle all the way around in my life back to where I originally started. And it really, the lessons I learned and the battles that I fought in women's athletics has served me well in everything I have ever done. Because what it taught me was don't ever, ever give up. Don't ever give up. Even if somebody tells you it can't be done, do not ever give up.
Right.
Because anything, as you said, Sarah, anything worth doing is hard.
That's right.
And, you know, so, but anyway, I this has been fun talking about this. It sort of, I can't believe this much time has gone by. Can you believe it?
Hey,
The whole lifetime's gone by.
it has. And like you said, we have been very fortunate to be able to, I tell people sometimes, I feel fortunate to still be here to be able to tell this. When Mickey called me and asked me about this, and he asked me, he said, well, who can you get to come on with you? I said, Barbara. You know, who else? And so it's like,
she's got to be living still somewhere. Still alive somewhere.
This is just so wonderful to be able to put this story out there. And at the same time, your athletes, the athletes that were there, you know, through Mickey's whole, 30 plus years and my little 10 or 11 years, it's like, it's a continuation of things that have come full, like you said, full circle. And so now only thing, you know, you build on this, you continue to build on this. But Mickey, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yes. And Sarah, it was wonderful seeing you too. It's great seeing you, really.
Yes.
You know, our padre in crime.
I've gotten to know Dora, you know, like one-on-one.
Sarah, Barbara, I appreciate y'all so very, very much.
And
this
you?
should be an interesting story.
Well, good luck with it. I appreciate you doing it. Just as Sarah has said, it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you for
Look
being
forward
a part.
to seeing it, Mickey. Thank you so much.
Y'all are welcome. And I'll make sure everybody gets a copy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
God
you.
bless you both.
Okay.
God bless
Thank
you and good luck.
Thank you.
Take care, Barbara. I'll make sure we keep in contact this time. We'll be 50 years.
All right. Good. Sounds good to me. All right.
Take care,
y'all.
Bye,
Okay,
everybody.
INSiiGHTS
INSiiGHTS is a copyright of Mac4 Enterprises, a Florida corporation. This broadcast is produced under the exclusive ownership of Mac4 Enterprises and is the intellectual property and trademark of Mac4 Enterprises. Comments of the host and other individual speakers on INSiiGHTS represent their independent thoughts and representation.